All right, welcome back to AM Live. With me in studio, we have Mark Bichachi, communication strategist. We have Annabelle Njoki, advocate. We have Maliba Arnold, public policy analyst, and has been branded rapper. He came ready. He came ready this morning. So we're just going to look at some of the things on the dailies before we substantively get into the discussion, which is also covering basically all the dailies. But Mark, when you look at El Nino, Ruto to chair emergency, let me just pull that up. Should be page 3. We flip back to that. We have 76 people, according to the Daily Nation here, who have lost their lives over this period. And so where did we lose the plot? We were warned by Kenya Met that there will be El Nino. The president told us it will be heavy rains. Then we had an apology. We apologize for misleading the nation from Kenya. Where did we lose this plot?
But that's exactly where we lost the plot, and that's why this story for me is critical. Communication and crisis go together. If you don't communicate a crisis succinctly and promptly in time, then when people are required to react to it, it takes them time, because there is time lost in preparing for heavy rains versus El Nino. There's time lost in looking for an apology, but also there's also been time lost in the communication between governors and our top executive, in the sense that they cannot agree as to who has the money for what should be done. So what needs to happen quickly is not just that this meeting needs to happen. We need to realize Kenya needs to have a disaster-ready system that is ready to go at a push of a button. It should not be that midway through how many 60-odd people have died is when now we are having an emergency meeting. That emergency meeting should have happened 6 months ago, and they should have been boots on the ground 6 months before, because we know what happens in Northeastern, we know what happens in Budalangi, we know what happens in parts of the coast when it rains as much. We also know what happens near our sewage treated plant in Ruai when it rains. Everybody knows this. The fact that we are not prepared is something that we need to first reflect on, and B, create a system where Kenyans can adequately rely on government to respond quickly without holding an emergency meeting.
Annabelle, does this fall on the president's doorstep? Did he essentially mislead the nation into relaxing, and then tragedy struck?
Definitely. You're head of state. You get briefings first thing every morning, sometimes ad hoc, based on the urgency of the situation or the needs of the country. Now, being head of state, there's the authority that your word carries. He basically forced the Met Department to eat their words. And because of that, Kenyans are losing lives. Kenyans don't have roofs over their heads, because really by the time we were seeing the kind of flooding we were seeing in Mombasa, surely only there is no way you're continuing to stay in your house. And it really is baffling, because it begs the question then, what are the head of state's priorities? What happened to independence of institutions, which is one of the mantles that he rode into office on, that I am going to allow state institutions to do their work with little to no interference. I mean, the guy at the Met Department is a small fish. So if it's the president asking him to do A, he will do A, lest he loses his job. But really, I agree with Mark. 6 months ago, this committee of people who are looking all sulky with their photo being taken at State House should have been behind closed doors figuring out what's going to happen. I believe we have adequately skilled individuals working at the meteorological department. So if they're telling us fire is coming, fire is coming. If they're telling us a storm is coming, chances are it's coming. And if there are going to be any changes, then it should be them telling us that actually 1, 2, 3 have changed, and therefore the impact is not going to be what we had anticipated it to be. But that wasn't the case. So you have what I would call a professional opinion, and then it is being surpassed by a roadside declaration, and here we are reaping the not so pretty benefits of the of the ignored professional opinion. So at this point, to be honest, it doesn't even matter how good a statement government puts together. It doesn't matter how quickly government moves from this point onwards. The damage is already done. And it's sending a very bad message, a message of a government that really doesn't care about the well-being of its nationals, because honestly, Olive, how is this happening? Yesterday in one of the groups, there was a message that was doing the rounds telling us over the next 2 weeks, expect 1 to 3, and the impact is likely to be more on the northern and eastern parts of Kenya.
I saw that.
And then one of the group members who is a Mombasa resident goes like, hey, wacha tupumue, let it go somewhere else. You know, we're not supposed to be, that is not supposed to be the reaction of the Kenyan. I understand, they're coming from the point of the suffering they have gone through over the past couple of weeks. But how are we even getting them to the point where they're heaving a sigh of relief that, hey, bana, let it go somewhere else, we've already gone through it? Because had appropriate measures been put in place in advance, that person would not even have felt the need to express themselves in that manner, because whatever evacuation measures needed to be put in place would have already been put in place. If it meant making a makeshift provision for your children to continue with their studies as, you know, these other things are being addressed, it would make sense. But right now, the way those guys had been marooned, you even have an emergency health crisis, you cannot rush your person to hospital. And even when you get them to hospital, is that dispensary or hospital, whether it's level 5, level 4, even in a position to receive you and attend to your patient? So it gives birth, or it creates a ripple effect that is so damning and so indignifying for this Kenyan person who also pays taxes. It's just, honestly, for me, there's nothing the government that can do right now to undo this. Maybe we talk about them doing better next year, but it's bad. This is a blot on their entire term. Between now and 27, this is a blot. It's bad.
Okay.
And unacceptable.
Arnold, issues that have been raised by your fellow panelists this morning include crisis communication. They have said zero. Annabelle is talking about the indignity. Do you know there's several stories we've carried of the situation in the slums? Literally outside their doors, sewage. And then there was a gentleman, I think, who had erected now his sleeping area. He had, for himself, he had created a sort of what are they called? Gabon, whatever, stones. A
gabion.
A gabion,
yes.
right? So he had erected, you know, he stacked stones on top of each other, and then now that's where he was sleeping. But there's also, then you have to consider then the health implications of living in such conditions. And it's only the other day that we saw the Ministry of Health now trigger updates on what that is like. In your view, where did we get it wrong? Or have we?
First of all, I've just realized that yourself and Annabelle might not have done 844 because while we were doing science and agriculture, gabions and such stuff, we wouldn't struggle to get it correct.
It eluded me briefly.
No, but I said gabion.
She said gabion.
That's why, be that as it may, I think we have, as a nation, we love bickering during times of emergency. And times of war, people should not be fighting. So we, and it's standard. You will see that during COVID, now, every time we've had even a unfortunate terrorist attack, we will always be bickering about who didn't do their work. It's time we actually come of age and also prepare adequately when these things happen. Like Annabelle has said, the outcome of the response towards an emergency, you cannot do a miracle during an emergency. You actually, the systems must be working for them to even stand chance, to be resilient enough to actually stand moments of chaos and moments of ruin. So, from where we are, I do not think that we have handled El Nino the way it's deserved. The former CS for Health would say if you treat at that particular time COVID normally, it will treat you abnormally. So, we are there. We've treated El Nino normally, it's now treating us abnormally. So I'll look at a few things on emergency response. First of all, there is the culture we have as a nation. We are a lynch nation. We are a bandwagon nation. When we started talking about COVID, this conversation was actually quite, from last year, people were mentioning, that is the next thing that is coming, we will be there. Early this year we were speaking about that. And then of course, the government also started speaking very well, or rather eloquently, on preparation on El Nino. Then somewhere, someplace, a very wise person at EACC showed up and said that people were looting in the name of El Nino. Immediately, as a nation, and Mark will tell you that communication really has got a way of affecting how projects are actually worked out. Immediately, even online, if you spoke about El Nino coming, you looked like you are a thief, you are preparing to steal, or you are working with those people who are stealing. So there's quite been a number. And then, of course, politicians by nature are populist. Even though we know that populist leaders cannot make far-reaching decisions sometimes. So somehow people started shying away from talking about El Nino and everything about that. You remember when there were stories about counties that were buying boats, there were stories about Nairobi buying boats and stuff and everything else. Then someplace along the way, the president tells us that the Met Department has downscaled. And the president reported, even when he said that he has been informed that it has been downscaled. I think also the way we communicated El Nino wasn't very, very appropriate when we were talking about it's just going to be elevated rains. But that is one of the symptoms of El Nino. Let me not call it or characteristics of El Nino. So we come down here. There's then the Met Department saying this and then pulling back. And then there is EACC, and of course, definitely politicians who are quick to lunge on that. Then we come here, then this thing that we are not in control of shows up. So we are at a place where now we've gone back to counties saying we've not received money, then the deputy president is saying the other thing. All of us are not doing the right thing. We actually needed to actually have acted much better because El Nino is not new in this country. At least the one I can remember very well when I was just now a person who could understand, I think it was in 1997.
Okay.
Yeah, so,
1997, yes.
So I don't think we've been very, we've really been apt around this. We've treated it like the normal politics we play around with in this country.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's something else you also wanted to comment on before getting into the topic. Annabelle, page 4 of the Daily Nation has to do with, on page 3, so just flip over, has to do with state keen to clip SRC Wings in a bid to control allowances. If passed, other state and public officers could push for enhanced remuneration. What state officers in same group as MPs are paid as per diem. This one is penned by one David Mwere. The government has proposed a law that will bar SRC from determining the local and foreign daily subsistence allowances. Subsistence allowances was also addressed in this report, right?
Yes.
And transport payments for MPs and judges. The government-sponsored statute law miscellaneous amendment bill of 2023 seeks to remove the power from SRC and hand it to the Parliamentary Service Commission and Judicial Service Commission. The omnibus bill signed by National Assembly Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah specifically wants Section 3, 5, and 18 of the Parliamentary Service Act of 2019 amended as it proposes new Section 13A under the Judicial Service Act of 2011. If passed, nothing will stop other cadres of state and public officers such as governors, their deputies, and MCAs for pushing for enhanced remuneration. Also proposed under Section 18 of the Parliamentary Service Act is a new Section 3 that gives the PSC the power to review and determine the rate of reimbursement for travel for MPs, quote, in accordance with international best practice. Article 172, 1B of the Constitution says that JC shall promote and facilitate the independence and accountability of the judiciary and efficient, effective, and transparent administration of justice. So is this, in your view, I'll start with you, Annabelle, about independence of these institutions and SRC being an impediment to that, or what's your take?
You see that last thing you've read just before you started reading on Article 172? In accordance with international best practice. Yes. Last I checked, anything SRC recommends, they are mandated to ensure that it aligns with international best practice. It goes without saying. That is why they have those 4-year reviews. Over those 4-year periods, that is why they ask, members, public servants and state officers to fill in certain forms so that they can determine this MDAs, state agencies are paying within this range. Is that what is acceptable if we compare them to agencies of equivalent stature in other jurisdictions? They do the same for our members of parliament. This is what you're earning. How is everybody else in the world earning, or who's performing a similar role? So what I'm wondering is whether we are not duplicating roles, and whether we are not creating a problem, and most importantly, what is the motivation for this proposal? Especially in view of the fact that you cannot tell me that one Honorable Kimani Ichung'wah, being leader of majority and playing the key role that he plays in the Kenya Kwanza government, he has not been receiving updates on what is going on with NADCO. Because now this flies in the face of the proposal being made in the report, where we're talking of, let's decrease this expenditure. Now you are saying, no, we want to be allowed to now determine what we're going to be earning. And I don't even see, first of all, forget even PSC, because that's a completely different ball game. For JSC already do this. JSC already sit and deliberate on what the salaries of judges, magistrates, and judicial staff should be. Then what they do, once they have come up with the tabulation, they send it to SRC for SRC to advise whether they are playing within the range of international best practice as per the surveys and studies that SRC has conducted. So SRC does not determine what judges and magistrates have paid, because at the end of the day, in as much as the judicial arm of government is independent, it cannot be operating like it's living in a world of its own. So yes, you may be increasing the salaries of judges, but the cadre that judges are at, when you compare with the rest of similar cadres in the Kenyan government, are they earning unconscionably more or unconscionably less? So there are very many variables and factors that go into this. So this, for me, is not making sense. Now, going back to the Public Service Commission and looking at their mandate, and they're already overwhelmed, and to a certain extent even under-delivering on their mandate, to want to then add onto their responsibility. Look at just how much time it takes them to shortlist job applications. Forget everything else, just job applications. Then you want to add this additional mandate. What is the motivation? It doesn't speak to, what do you call it? It doesn't speak to goodwill. It doesn't. You're suspicious. Very. All right. Mark Bichachi, is this a question of independence of these institutions? Is it that SRC does not fully appreciate the scope of what weighs on their shoulders?
It's only in Kenya where employees want to set their own salaries. So employees, here being parliamentarians, every 5 years also have this fight where they want to determine what they think they ought to be paid. Never you mind that the Kenyan MP, compared to our GDP, is one of the highest paid political leaders anywhere in the world. Their salaries compete with the United States of America, which is worth trillions of dollars in GDP. It is better than some of MPs paid in Europe, definitely paid better than German MPs. So already they're above board. But can I ask you something on that before you proceed? Yes. There's the ideal situation and then kuna the reality on the ground. Yes. Our MPs, unlike maybe those ones in Germany or those ones in the US, if there's an emergency, wanatumiwa message. Kama kuna mazishi, kama mtu amegonjeka, they basically are ATMs for their constituents. Yeah, but you see, that's the thing. That is not part of your salary. Okay, when for example, Nation Media Group pays your salary, is there a section written there, relatives? Is there an allowance for relatives? They ask you when you're joining the job, do you have 16 relatives? How many do you think will die in 6 years? How many youth harambes do you need to attend? The rest of us also have responsibilities. As in, come on, who in this country who has a job, a salary, does not help other people? How is your generosity? Does the Constitution say that an MP needs to pay for people's, to drive people home in hearses when they pass on? No. If you choose to be generous, do so on your own dime. The rest of us pay taxes, and also take care of people. This idea of feeling sorry for MPs because, oh, there are people in the village they need to take care of. You campaigned wrongly, you bought the vote, maintain that vote by buying it. But we will pay you what is standard for an MP. That's number one. Number two, I don't know why we're speculating whether this is an action of greed or not. The SRC is one of those commissions that has never been taken to court and failed in defending itself. It is one of those commissions, even the corruption scourge that usually bedevils this country, SRC has by and large escaped those things. So if there is anyone competent in this country to tell us what MPs should earn, to tell us how much per diem should be given when people fly out of the country, it is the SRC. And beyond that, I do not know which countries we benchmark with. I have traveled under the government banner. I have traveled under it. Trust you me, there was no difference between me and the Americans. Imagine, Americans should benchmark with us. Who's paid better than us? Surely. Whose per diem hits the numbers Kenyans hit? What are we benchmarking against? You are already at the top. Final point. In this country, if you earn more than 100,000 shillings a month, you are in the top 2%. Top 2%. An MP salary is 600,000 per month, top 1%. His per diem outside this country per day, depending on where he is, varies from 90,000 to 170,000 shillings a day. You tell your grandmother at home what she can do with 90,000 shillings a day, then tell me what these MPs are yapping about.
Arnold?
This story is a little bit complex because if we use the thinking that the three arms of government, of course, are independent and therefore everybody should decide their own fate, there is that little question I like to ask. Does that then mean that county assemblies also would then, through the County Public Service Board, decide to set their own salaries because they are also legislatures?
So what I'm seeing this deals with is local and foreign daily subsistence allowances, transport payments.
That's what I'm actually saying. Then the County Public Service, the County Assembly Public Board would actually sit down and also decide that for MCAs differently because they are also legislatures. Unless you tell me that there is what is, and all of us agree that we have got the executive, the legislature, and then the judiciary. The only thing that we share between counties and national government is the judiciary. Otherwise, the county has got its own executive. And if therefore SRC should only deal with governors and the staff who work in the counties, then MCAs should also be able to set. This one is setting a very dangerous precedent because then it's in law. Or you think MCAs, they no longer pass bylaws. They are a legislature like any other. They are members of parliament down there. So this law flies in the face of so many things. And why are they concerned about this? I've said a number of times that parliament for us is the weakest link in our governance. As we speak already, like if we were to go back to the report, they're talking about entrenching the World Development Fund, CDF and everything else. That for me is one of those areas I'm actually opposed to because it shows despondency in parliament. Parliament has refused to be parliament because we are now voting in CDF managers as opposed to legislators, people who can actually do legislation, people who can do oversight, people who can do representation, people who should be looking at the budget, for example. They're not looking at that. They're not working around that. So they are busy just with these funds. Now we want to actually introduce another angle to this. No, I think the country has got so much going on. We've got El Nino, for example, and Parliament should give us a break. This is not the kind of news you want when you have got an emergency. At least on that, they should be sensitive enough. And be that as it may, I do not think that SRC is 100% also not to blame. You know, there is idealism versus reality. We will say our leaders are paid much more. That's fair. For MPs, that is very good. But Oliver, I would like you to actually think of this. My rural governor in Kakamega has got a budget of 17 billion shillings. The basic salary for an MCA is about 87,000 shillings. So a man earning roughly about 100K is supposed to oversight a man who's controlling 17 billion shillings. So on MCAs, I think whether we like it or not, and those are the people on the ground. Nairobi MPs are always in Nairobi. They show up once they have got money, like Mark has said, and they show up big, they run away. So still around this, there are other cadres that have not really been addressed properly. We've got our doctors, whom I still feel we've not paid them very well. Teachers do difficult work, but somehow we've found ways of making explanations about their own travels. And TSC cannot decide how much it's paying them because SRC must give concurrence for whatever they do. So SRC also must weigh out, because there are some responsibilities. There are wards in this country that are the same size as a constituency elsewhere. And the same guy earning the same money under the same rate is expected to deliver as much. Oversight fails in the counties because partly we pay MCAs badly. We don't want to hear about that. Of course, we are doing badly as a country. But then we are human beings. And reality actually states that if you're going to give me little money to watch after so much money, what happens if there's a chance to steal?
All right. Yeah. But Olive, just a rejoinder to finish up on this subject, based on some issues Arnold has raised at the end. If it's a question of campaign expenditure, you have the avenue for capping at campaign financing, which is a legislation that has consistently been taken by IEBC to the National Assembly. They have refused to pass it. And if you look at it critically, that right there, campaign financing, is where Wanjiku's problems begin. Because umemwaga, and therefore when you get there, you must recoup, amongst other things. Then, you create an avenue for corruption, We cannot make certain excuses for them. If it's a question of some wards are bigger than others, comes the question of boundary delimitation, which is a good thing now you're starting us on that report, because it is among the things covered there.
It is.
Yeah, so we cannot just place all that blame on SRC's doorstep. Like I said, there are very many other factors and variables that need to be taken into consideration.
All right. So, of course, we can only cover so much in this time period where this report is concerned, because it is a whole 296 pages. So my focus is, as far as we are able to, within the 45 minutes or so left on the show, look at what is in it for Wanjiku, because it is Wanjiku who went on the streets. It is Wanjiku who lost their, Wanjiku speaking broadly, the citizenry. It is the citizenry which lost their lives, right? So some highlights covered on the front page of yesterday's Standard. We've already mentioned some of this in the course of the conversation. Senate Oversight Fund, Ward Development Fund, and NGCDF, which I think you mentioned, Arnold, entrenched into the Constitution. Office of the Leader of Opposition with 2 deputies, the Mifupa that Taifa Leo is talking about today, right? Arnold, you can confirm for me. Prime Cabinet Secretary Office. I saw something about requiring the vetting of Parliament. That did not happen this time around, but that is what, if this is adopted, will happen. A constitutional office to oversight party fidelity, audit of 2022 electoral process, and expanded IEBC's election panel from 7 to 9 members. Increased timeline for Supreme Court to hear presidential petition from 14 to 21 days. Reduce officials' travel budgets by 50%. Cut subsistence allowances by 30%. Mark, I think you made reference to this. Reduce road maintenance levy and anti-adulteration levy by 5 shillings and 3 shillings respectively. Government to finalize transfer of all devolved functions. What they differed on, reduction of VAT on fuel from 16 to 8%. Scrapping of the controversial housing levy. So, Mark, when we got into this dialogue process, there was already the memo that the president had written to the Parliament, National Assembly, Senate, with regard to his parliamentary agenda. So he had talked about this, the entrenchment of CDF. He talked about realization of the 2/3 gender principle. He had talked about, what am I forgetting? Leader of the opposition, right? So it appears, for the most part, he has achieved what he intended to achieve. Azimio triggered the talks, right? Following the passage of the Finance Act. And they had the sufurias, famed sufurias on their head. And this was the wave was a cost of living one, right? We are going to these talks, cost of living must be addressed. But you hear now persons from their camp saying this issue came last, and has not been conclusively addressed. But Kenya Kwanza was very clear from the get-go that cost of living should not be on the agenda, because they said these are policy issues. We're already moving in a direction to bring it down. So where are we with that, in your view?
So to understand this report, you've got to understand the different problems and audiences it is addressing, right? So if you look at the political problems and the politicians that are being addressed, then this document is right and dandy for them. Number one, you've got leader of opposition with 2 deputies. That means, because now it's a tradition that when you're running for office, you declare who's going to be your deputy and who's going to be prime CS. So creating a positions for the leader and his 2 running mates, if you please, that has been done. So the political settlement is done. Then you've got...
Wait, so when you say the political settlement is done, is you don't anticipate anybody going back to the streets?
You see, let me tell you, no, the political settlement of the political positions.
Okay.
If you listen to everyone who's dissenting to this thing, none of them is dissenting to their positions. Because those positions for them, either in 5 years or at the passing of whatever bill or a referendum that is required, they stand to benefit. So let's be very clear. Number 2, you've got the other political question of IEBC, the audit, and then the selection panel. They've agreed on that. So as far as the political class and their problems are concerned, it has been addressed. Now, let me be honest with my fellow Kenyans. Those politicians, when they went to sit down, those are the things they went to sit down for. You and I come after. How do you know we were an afterthought? During these talks, the bill to change NHIF to SHIF was done, okay? It is a significant change because one of the biggest costs for families and for people in this country is healthcare, right? It is, in fact, as far as I'm concerned, one of the things that the UDA government can tout as one of their successes in easing the lives of Kenyans. They can tout it. But did this committee discuss it? No. Did they discuss the core issues? And this is where I agree with Arnold when he says that the economics of a country are not simply unplugged as though it is a TV set, because there are so many things connected to 16% VAT. There are so many things connected to housing fund. There are so many things connected. If they were serious, they would have talked about the nuts and the bolts without giving us political platitudes without any depth. How do I know there is no depth? If you are going to say we are going to reduce taxes, and by the way, as someone whose pocket is suffering, I really need my taxes reduced, but also at the same time say to that same committee, you're reducing taxes and this is where you're going to save money, and that money is not about slashing people traveling by 50%. They need to slash, for example, the 91 billion increase in the recurrent budget that was just passed, that passed 91 billion extra shillings for people to have tea and coffee and travel around. That is where the money is to be saved. Whenever people have discussed something conclusively, you can see the logic from beginning to end. Dear Kenyans, these politicians don't care about us. Michael Jackson said it. They don't really care about us. I'm repeating it for you, and this report is proof positive that they don't.
Annabelle, were you expecting much on the cost of living? And I asked that again because of some of the points I made to Mark. The president was very clear from the beginning when, remember the press briefing, the first one, and he said the remit of this conversation is the reconstitution of IEBC. Azmio clamored to get the cost of living on the agenda. Were you expecting much on issues to do with the cost of living from these talks?
Remember my starting point when I came into studio, when I gave you the context within which national dialogues tend to happen. Now, I told you normally it's the national elites who are at play. So for government, they are looking, in defending their legitimacy, they are also looking to defend everything that they used to ride into office. Because anything coming out of the position, a common position that goes to the contrary of what they rode into office is the equivalent of saying we were wrong as government, which begs the question, then were the ones who voted for you wrong in voting for you? Again, you're still fighting with the question of legitimacy. Then for the ones who have occasioned the government to come to the table are usually looking either for political reforms or a political transition. Political transition in our Kenyan context, think 2002 election. Now, in this particular scenario, we were not looking so much for a political transition, perhaps in the instances where we're looking at the question of IEBC, our electoral system and the conduct of our elections. Maybe that could touch on political transition, but largely we're looking at political reforms. And it is having this questions such as issues of taxes and levies being addressed. Now, each side took a tough stance from the onset. 2 weeks ago, you could tell the question of cost of living had not been adequately addressed because when they were in Naivasha, apparently Azimio came with sort of like a fresh list of irreducible minimums. But looking at that list, it was basically heavily emphatic on the question of cost of living being addressed. So it tells you, as at 2 weeks ago, by the way, if it's a question of looking out for red flags, that was a red flag for Kenyans. At that point, we should have known this thing is not heavy on cost of living. And then cometh the hour, cometh the report, and we discover we've only gotten what, Mark? 3 clauses in the recommendations.
If that, if you can call them
if
clauses.
we can call them,
yes.
if you can call them clauses. So has it been addressed? I would say no. And there are other issues that affect where we are as a country from an economic standpoint that are also creating a pressure point or a pain point for Kenyans. And that is also the question of corruption. But what does this committee do? Whereas they're giving timelines for other recommendations, on the question of corruption, they say that Parliament should fast track whatever legislations they have pending to pass them so that they can enhance the position of government in fighting corruption. First of all, I fail to understand what additional legislations we need to be passing, considering we already have POCAMLA, we are signatories to how many other treaties and international protocols that are advancing, especially the position of anti-money laundering, etc. And then, again, it's also vague in its wording on the question of campaign financing. And I already spoke to why that is a pressure point for Wanjiku, because for somebody who's looking to run for member of parliament in this country, ideally, if we're to play Kenyan politics the way it is played, Maliba can give you a crash course on that. He's experienced. Someone is looking at a budget of, say, 20 million. That's for a member of parliament. So if you're looking at a governor, say from my county where we have 12 constituencies, that person is looking at a budget of like 240 million. And then look at a budget of 60 million, say, specifically for election day. That's for your agents, changing people's minds at that last corner before they get to the polling station. So total 300 million. Those are just 2 individuals in our entire scheme of governance. You haven't factored in the cost of campaigns for an MCA, senator, woman rep. All right? Now, where do you expect this person is going to get the money from? They come back into government, and then now we start having issues of service delivery and what have you. Again, this money that you're looting, where are you channeling it? Is it being invested in the Kenyan economy? Are you taking it outside of Kenya? So you can start seeing how the element of corruption is contributing to the weakening of the shilling and therefore Wanjiku's problem. So yes, cost of living has not been adequately addressed, but I fully agree with Mark when I say the political questions have been covered from top to bottom and sideways.
Okay.
They have been. You can clearly see the thought process that went into them. And then now it goes back to, again, my starting point, the composition of the national dialogue team. You do not only factor in the political class, you're also supposed to open it up to larger groups like civil society. So perhaps for it to be adequately constituted, we should have had Azimio, Kenya Kwanza, key players from civil society. And when you're talking civil society, you're looking at those groups that are fully focused on questions of economics, those groups that are fully focused on questions of social welfare, so that each is coming to address a very specific element or issue. But we didn't have that. So, because it was largely made up of politicians, the politicians have addressed the political problems satisfactorily. As for the economic and social issues, zimegusiwa tu, ndio muone ziliangaliwa, but I can't say they have been adequately addressed.
All right, so I need to take a break, Arnold Utanisame here, but we will come back with your thoughts on, because I know, bado kuna bullet points hujafikia, on the question of what is in this, the NADCO report for Wanjiku.
The AA journey started like a dream 104 years ago. With the right leadership, the right business model, the right standards and international affiliation with FIA, AA has grown to support you with various mobility products and services. And it's growing. Now, you need sunglasses because the future, the future of AA Kenya is too bright.
AA Kenya, inspiring mobility.
On my dark marks, I've tried everything from A to Z, even vitamin C, but hardly any results. Nivea Lumina 630 works from day one, with visible results in just 2 weeks and 71% dark marks reduction in 12. Join the 1 million women already using the #1 Lumina 630 from Nivea.
When you're finally released from pain. That moment when you start to get back to ordinary, and ordinary feels amazing. Whatever pain you're going through, release starts here.
Kenya, twende mbele. NCBA, go for it.
For decades, a silent struggle has persisted in the vibrant heart of sub-Saharan Africa. Access to quality education for girls has been marred by barriers such as poverty, discrimination, and societal norms that echo through generations.
In the region, the common challenge is poverty. We have smart girls, even smart boys, but they are challenged with the poverty from their homes.
Education is our hope.
We are breaking barriers.
We dream of a brighter future.
The Sport Essence is a light serum, quickly absorbed to clear dark marks. Rich moisturizing cream is a gel cream type that deeply hydrates and prevents dark marks. I highly recommend Melano CC for healthy and happy skin.
Roto.
Welcome back. Welcome back to AM. Wamerudi bila warning. Anyway, Arnold, Maliba, your opportunity now to respond to my question is, what is in this report in your view for Wanjiku?
First of all, I'm actually, it's important for me to actually register that I've tried to skim through the summary, the 8-page summary that was quick to go through. Then I looked at the 296, tried to go through. It needs a little bit of more reading. So realistically, I've not looked at the bigger report in depth, just skimmed. There's the 8-page summary. You can actually do 15 to 20 minutes read, and you cross-reference with the other bigger report. So I've got a little bit of a grasp on it. The people who have got so much information on these are the people who wrote it. They brought it out late at night. Then they brought the report in the morning, the real report. The 8 pages was released at night. And then the bigger report, spell-checked, came out later on in the morning. So a few things, looking at the 14 proposed constitutional changes. But we are talking about the cost of living and everything else. Sometimes it feels good to say I told you so. I know, however bad that is. I am on record for having been opposed to the dialogue process. I still believe that it was unnecessary, because if I were to ask Kenyans today, if you've taken time, do not even look at the bigger 296-page report. Just look at the 8-page report, the summary of the report. It is not worth the 60 lives that were lost in the streets. It is not worth the billions that were lost in destruction of property, harming of businesses, injuries, and generally scaring away tourists and everything else. The economic harm occasioned or visited upon this country is not worth that report. That report would have been done by the three of us without killing anyone. As in, that report is things that all of us agree. So, whereas I actually think the report is much more realistic, is actually much more practical, but it's not worth the lives that were lost. It's not worth the money that we actually have put out there to do this NADCO thing. I have seen my former party leader, I am now partyless, my former party leader saying that he is opposed to this report, and therefore he sat in the committee, and therefore he will not draw any allowances to it. That is Honorable Eugene Wamalwa. But you see, NADCO has paid for all the sittings he was at Bomas when they went to Elementaita. Will he refund that? When he was at Stony Athi, they've taken care of his transport and everything. So the allowance part of it is actually a very small part of it. The cost that went into him being in that particular committee is much more than that. And having sat there all through only to come out is dishonesty to some level. So this report, as it is for me, other than being practical, I welcome it and appreciate it for being practical. I have got a few things, of course, that I'm opposed to, but it's not worth the airtime we've given it for almost a year now. We are going to a year. We started Maandamano, I think, immediately after elections. So it's not worth the airtime given to it. It's not worth the lives lost and everything around it. The biggest elephant in the room, of course, this particular morning is the cost of living. Like I said in the past, the cost of living cannot be brought down by people sitting in Bomas. The only cost of living that came down was for the people who were seated at Bomas, taking tea and snacks, going to Elementaita and having 7-course meals and Stony Athi. Even as they argued, the cost of living for them had gone down because the state was taking care of that during that particular period. But for us as Kenyans, we had to go back to what the government has been saying clearly, that the cost of living will not be reduced in the streets, it will be reduced in farms. That is why today the cost of flour has gone down. We still have got other aspects in the 8 tenets that define the cost of living. Others have gone down. Cooking oil is much lower than where it was. Unga is down. Fuel is giving us a headache. I hope that will actually be corrected eventually. So this report wasn't going to deal with that. And I remember when we spoke about this, I don't know whether it was in June or May, somehow this whole set was here, except you and probably this cameraman, because we were with Ben Kitili then at night. And I said that if you remember the genesis of this report, it started with the post-election fallout. There was a section that felt that the numbers for them were different. Like Trump, they had alternative facts, they had alternative figures. Then we went through that particular process. But then when it looked like the cost of living became the easiest way to rally the masses, they then brought it in, just as an icing on the cake. Otherwise, the whole idea about dialogue was about the political end of it. And I support Ndindi Nyoro because I've just found his statement. He's actually saying that it's actually the wrong time to talk about leadership. That the country is actually going through difficulties, and that if we are prioritizing leadership and other things, it doesn't make sense. So when he says that there's no one opposing, when Mark says that no one is opposing the report based on seats, at least Ndindi Nyoro is on record saying that it's not the time to talk about leadership. So that particular bit, I think we shouldn't go the BBI way that was heavy on positions and little or thin on the real issues.
Okay, before you move on from that point, Mark, on the question, so who do we look to for answers? It is Azimio who told us there will be no business on Mondays. Tunenda kwa barabara. Kenyans died. So do we look to them? Do we ask them, Allah, what happened to our agenda? Or do we look to Kenya Kwanza? Kenya Kwanza, when they were on the campaign trail and they were campaigning against BBI, they said our administration will not be about creating positions. They have created positions. Who do we look to? Mark Bichachi.
Listen, in this country, if someone is a politician and you choose to trust them, there is something significantly wrong with how your parents brought you up to know what to trust, what is wrong, and what is right. This is the problem with Kenya. Any person who decides to trust a politician is as good as someone who puts his finger on an electric source and does not expect to be electrocuted. So if you tell me, should we trust Azimio or UDA, I will tell you, trust them absolutely. Trust them to be selfish. And what is the selfish agenda? First and foremost, it is the creation of jobs. Okay? The leader of opposition, the prime minister position, which I support, by the way, because I think this country needs a robust opposition. I agree 100%, but that is their selfish ambition. We only hope that our ambitions can piggyback on their wagon, right? So if it is a train, we are at the back. First class, business class, cattle class, then uko nyuma where they put hay for horses, that's where we are. When you get that into your head, you will understand that you can trust a politician to do what is right for them. Then it is your job to hope that you can hitch your wagon to what they want to do. Therefore, what should Kenyans do? Number one, we can't go back to the streets. We can't. Because the guy who can call you to the streets is no longer interested in calling you to the streets. And because you can't call yourself, let's not bother, right? What Kenyans can do is begin now to plan for 2027. Not because they will get necessarily better MPs, better senators, no. But because the philosophy of politics should always be that politicians and diapers should be treated the same. They should be changed often for the same reason. So.
Yeah. All right, but Annabelle, maybe this report is an indicator that at this point, really, there is nothing much that can be done where the economic situation is concerned. Follow me. I can see your facial expression is like,
it's like, did you just say that?
Yeah, because I asked that because they had from various various submissions made to them, including from the Treasury Cabinet Secretary, Njuguna Dungu, who said, by the ata msiguze hiyo tax regime yenye iko sahi, we cannot afford it. The debt is strangling us. The choices of the past, the decisions we made, the subsidies of the past are what are costing us now.
Yes. Are we paying for our past sins? Yes. Our past poor decisions? Definitely. But now, even as Mark and I are saying what is here is not sufficient, it was definitely a starting point, because we've also had a government that has been expecting us to kaza kamba, and then they're just frolicking and gallivanting. Eh? We've seen some county officials from this good county where this very beautiful building is situated have finessed Gulliver's Travels. Eh? They've been moving from one country to another to another. They're hardly ever here. So it's like they visit their offices at the county. So do we definitely need to rein in on the expenditure? Yes, and that would be a good starting point. However, even as our good CS is telling us to dig in our heels, there are some things that really, truly government cannot tell us that they cannot do. You've run us through the FKE statement very nicely. That is just FKE. You've not taken into consideration the cries of KEPSA, the cries of Kenya Association of Manufacturers, Juakali industry, yeah, organizations like or associations like APA, who more or less sort of play within, not too far from where you guys play in. And they're all speaking to something. Businesses are struggling. So you're telling us not to touch your tax regime. But clearly, for the short period of time that we have been assessing your tax regime, you're already struggling to meet targets. Why are you struggling to meet targets? Because even those who are contributing to the initial targets that you were saying were not being met are not contributing anymore. People have had to let go of workers. People are considering shutting their businesses down. Some have already shut their businesses down. And what we're saying is, you continue with this tax regime that you're defending so passionately. I am not so sure what percentage of FKE's membership is still going to be standing by the time he is going to Parliament to read his second budget. I am not sure, because things are not looking good. Employers are having to transition their contract workers into wage workers. Some have told them, now we can only engage you on a consultancy basis, which of course means some securities or benefits are no longer there. If you're engaged as a consultant, we can forget about pension. We can forget about health insurance. Pension is more or less speaking to what the president kept saying, that we need to develop a saving culture. So where is that saving culture coming from if this person is no longer on that permanent sort of engagement? What does it mean for them? Because yes, they may be engaged as a consultant, which means sort of a reprieve on the tax front, but with the cost of goods, how much are they even remaining within their pocket to think of? Is saving even a conversation they can afford to have in his or her household? So you cannot tell us to not touch your precious tax regime. We have to find some middle ground. We have to meet each other halfway, so that can you make certain compromises for us as a citizenry, and then let them look into how to get more of the citizenry into the tax bracket, because unfortunately they've decided to take the comfort path, which is continuing with the already existing tax base, which is not enough. It's only a fraction of the market. So how about give this fraction of the market that you have been overly taxing a bit of a reprieve, get more people into it, all right? And we're not even asking for compromises on everything. FKE's asks actually very, very reasonable and very basic, if you ask me. And I also agree with them to the extent that government cannot be making decisions arbitrarily. You do not wake up and declare, you do not wake up and announce without engaging the crucial elements in your market. Who are the employers? They're the ones who are largely contributing to the GDP of this country. So if you're not sitting down to, have a conversation with them to assess the practicality of your proposals, it's not going to work. I again agree with them when we say our tax regime is very unpredictable. And I have said that here, I think on 2 different occasions. It's very unpredictable. Well, we're talking about marketing Kenya as an investment destination, but I, as a legal practitioner, cannot even... When a foreign client comes and they're asking me, okay, so I would want to set up in Kenya, how do you advise we go about the structuring of whatever I want to set up? There was a time when it was very easy for you to advise, but now you're not so sure. The easiest or convenient vehicle you tell them to use is an LLC, which is a limited liability company, which is subject to corporate tax. But today, can I advise a client on that? I'm not sure, because today I'm telling them the Kenyan corporate tax is this. After 2 months, they're waking up, the Kenyan corporate tax is something else. Then there's the implications on payee. Why won't they up and move to Rwanda? Why won't they up and move to DRC? I was moderating a panel last month, no, actually early this month, and one of the panelists happens to work for one of our financial institutions. And he was cracking a joke about how when they were releasing their annual report, their MD pretty much told their Kenyan country director, hey, you need to watch your back because our subsidiary in country X is hot on your heels because their economy is thriving. Unfortunately, ours is the only one in the region that's shrinking. So do you really want to tell us that there's nothing, absolutely nothing, that can be done? I think there's something that can be done. Yes, IMF pretty much has us by the balls, we have to comply, but we should also have the audacity to tell IMF, listen, we want to comply with your terms, but we do not rule over tables and stones, we rule over people whose welfare we depend on.
All right.
Because without our welfare, hiyo ushuru mnatoa wapi?
Let me ask Arnold to come in at this point. Is it a case of, I'll pose the same question that I posed to Annabelle, which is was it a case of there was very little, because they heard from experts, right? Is it a case of there is very little wiggle room? Because David D is the one who said if it is not for World Bank and IMF, we would have gone the Ghana route. But then again, even clearly in the last 1 year, if you look at FK's statement, if you look at some of these headlines, right? So FK is saying people daily, 70,000 jobs lost in the last year, since October last year. You look at Daily Nation, Hapaju, tough times, banks in rare profit dip as loan defaults hit 611 billion shillings. You take a look at Business Daily, your favorite. MPs plot to impeach Ndongo Thuge over shilling free fall. Clearly, something is not working.
That thing did not stop working today. Just before I respond to that, I'd like to respond to what Mark said. He was talking about trying to, that if you believe politicians, then you probably were not brought up well. I'd just like to remind Mark that Kenyans are better politicians than their leaders. The average Kenyan is a better politician than the MP or the MCA. And democracy is like milk. The best substance in milk comes on top. So those are our leaders. It's a representative sample of who we are. It's hard to actually put a Kenyan apart from their own leaders, because the leaders we have did not fall as stones. They didn't occur as miracles. In fact, what we are having a problem with when we talk about electoral justice, it's just the top 2 seats. That is the president and the deputy president. No one is complaining about the MCA they elected. No one is complaining about the MP they elected or the governor. So they are very much okay. And do we agree with what those leaders are doing? Not entirely. So it's difficult to actually put a Kenyan apart from his leader. And Kenyans can actually teach you the fear of God. Ask politicians, they will tell you. There is no one who knows how to character develop politicians than Kenyans themselves. So if you can actually character develop a politician, you definitely are a better politician. Annabelle is, we've really been going about the issue of the cost of living. Partly also, the National Dialogue Committee was not a crisis committee. It was not a team formed after a coup. We had a government in place. So there are a number of things that I saw, especially in the last 2 weeks, as me trying to sneak in and trying to make them a little bit of sticky issues. Those issues border on usurping the power of parliament. Because if you are somebody sitting at Bomas, having his mahamri and tea and everything else or whatever coffee, then he decides what parliament should do, then it means that the business or the vocation that Annabelle is in, the legal part of it, that the constitution has become a suggestion that somebody outside of what is actually given can actually come up with proposals. And then I am actually hoping that a number of these radical solutions that I'm still opposed to, that are in the report, Parliament should further water it down to realistic things that we can actually achieve. We need to learn what to chew. You know, we should not have something that looks like the Jubilee 1.0 kind of promise. They were so lofty, they were so extravagant in their promises that they broke the bank in our economy trying to actually achieve that. We need to actually take care of, or rather do a court that is fitting of us. Otherwise, if we come up with other proposals again that will take us that particular route, when we are already in the ICU economically, I don't think we are doing things that are wise, and it's not even safe to go that particular direction. So in the cost of living, the attempt of usurping power, away from parliament and the executive. And number 2, it will look like some other people are co-governing with the government of the day. She wanted to call it legitimacy, but that is an Osumukate thinking that you can actually now govern the country from outside, that you sit somewhere and you send your tweets or your SMSs with the person who's sitting in the committee, and thus you rule a country. We have got a government that is elected and is legit. Now, having said that, I'd like to start with this here, that like I said earlier on, this report was not worth 60 people losing their lives. The cost of living is best, and we have seen policies that have worked. For example, subsidizing production. We have seen that. that the cost of living will be brought down at the production level. It's much more sustainable than subsidizing consumption. At least we have got an example.
To you, bringing down the cost at production level, but at this point, there are people who are suffering.
Can I just finish this? You know, it's true, and no one is denying that the situation is dire. People are losing jobs. Life is not, even the president has said so. No one is denying that. But it's not even David Ndii who said that World Bank is saving us. I have said this here before, that as early as 5 years ago, 3 years ago, economists were telling us that we will go bust by 2022, that we will default by then. So, have we looked at what probably has been done? And I see Mark itching. Annabelle ran here for so many minutes and he didn't itch. So he should put his hands down and stop threatening me with his hand.
You cannot tell me when not to itch. You cannot tell me when to itch. I'm allowed to itch whenever I want.
That said, I'd love to point out this, that what we are not willing to actually point out is what is working. We want to water that down. What we are not willing to actually look at is that it could be far much worse were it not the efforts that have actually been put in. So, even as we look at the numbers by FKE, by the way, about half of it makes good sense. There's part of it that is actually a lot of hot air, because again, from 1992, the official, the formal sector was overtaken by the informal sector. In 1992, that is about 30 years ago. So today, the biggest part of our economy is informal. The people we talk about pay as you earn, and we've tried to actually widen the net as opposed to deepening it. And as you try to widen the net, you realize that sometimes the people that already feel the pinch of the taxes will still fall within that. So there's need for tax justice. But how will we have tax justice when we are in a hole? We got ourselves here. We were clapping and saying all things are good. So can we get out of this? First of all, we need to get out of that particular hole before we talk about these other issues. So it's difficult, but something is being worked in. By the way, the people who will actually benefit from the pain that we are now, the first people who will actually benefit are the people in the corporate sector, the FKEs of this world, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers. Those will be the first people in 2025 to actually reap big before the people now actually come to reap out of it. So what is being done, first of all, is to fix. And by the way, I don't know all of you if you've had a wound. I am a boy, and boys will be boys. I have got a lot of scars on me by playing and doing everything else. Wounds are painful, but then the way you actually have to clean it and work it out, that is how then you get well. I'm seated here because somebody decided that the days I would play with the bike and hurt myself and injure myself, that I had to feel pain before I am able to stand up. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
All right.
So the pain that we're going through now.
I'm looking at the clock, and I want to give you each a minute because you will accuse me of not giving you time to
finalize. It's okay. Yeah. So long as.
So, Mark, like I said, we can only cover so much in this time period. But in your closing remarks, do you expect moving forward, because this has to be submitted to Parliament and the principles, you know, do you expect at any point the conversation on cost of living to take precedence? And I ask that because you look at government officials going out to meet the people, and they're getting a hostile reception in some instances. The president himself has received hostile receptions in some instances.
Well, the reception is hostile because we are not boys playing in a playground, hurting our knees and crying to our mommy. We are grown adults, and we are looking at our bank accounts and looking at how much money we need to spend to live, and we are saying it's impossible. There is no amount of talk about it that's going to work. So I'll give you what my crystal ball tells me. If I was advising UDA, the thing that I would embrace with all my arms is this NADCO report, and I'll tell you why. Because it will deflect the people from talking about cost of living. So it is to UDA's advantage to create a date for a referendum to create leader of opposition position, because then Raila Odinga supporters would be looking for a place to put Raila Odinga in a place where they feel he'll be able to hold the government accountable. The other leaders who are looking for the premiership, Mudavadi and the rest who's sitting in that position, will be looking for an opportunity to do so. So this is a brilliant opportunity to segue the conversation away from cost of living into issues that actually matter, because what they have not realized to date is their entire narrative around cost of living is not working. This is free advice, no invoice is coming. That narrative is not working. They're telling me that I'm suffering now and things will be better. My friend, how? How? Magically? No, because the cost of fuel is not going to magically drop in 2025. In fact, I bet you it will be past 300 shillings in that 2025. So it's okay to come up with spin and narrative and things like that, but when people have real pain, it actually create a cogent narrative, a cogent explanation that we can follow. You are fixing things. What have you fixed? Was the fuel price broken that you needed to fix it? And where was it broken? Was the cost of my groceries broken that you needed to fix it? No. Was the dollar broken? It is more broken now, more than ever. So how can you break something and say you're fixing it?
Annabelle?
You're asking about what we're expecting. The thing about having an area of interest bundled with other areas of interest is that there's a very high likelihood of it carrying the day. But now the risk with this conversation about cost of living is that it has been too much segregated to the periphery throughout this entire conversation, that there's a very high likelihood the other issues in this report are going to overshadow it when it gets to Parliament. So, and so far we've seen, again, I completely agree with Maliba on this, that Parliament has been our weakest link in as far as the governance of Kenya. We have seen members of Parliament who, even as he's saying, because our leaders are a reflection of us as a people, that we've not, you're hearing people complaining about Ruto and Gachagua, but nobody's complaining about the member of Parliament. I consistently come here and complain about my member of Parliament because he is among the people in that house who are not willing to stand up and speak up for what it is that is ailing his people. Yet that is the #1 mandate. So I know for a fact, like for them, part of entrenching NGCDF, NGAF, and the other one is going to be on a priority, entrenching them into the constitution. Perhaps slashing the travel and budgets may not be by 50%, 30% respectively, may not be so much of a priority for them. So for me, the greatest danger for this conversation on cost of living is that even when we engage National Assembly and Senate, it's still very likely to be overshadowed by the other issues.
All right. I've been given 30 seconds to conclude. Maliba.
Quickly on spins, we've seen an attempt to actually bring up issues around hostile receptions and everything like that. First of all, we are a very liberal country. We tell our leaders what we feel at any particular point, and that for me is progress. I saw CS Chirchir being heckled in, I think, Bomet. That was not about national issues, it was actually local issues about electricity connectivity, and he comes from that particular area. It had nothing to do. Two, yesterday there was a clip going around, protect my time. Yesterday there was a clip going around with the CS Murkomen with a little bit of noise. I support Manchester United. If you go to my timeline, one of those things that is actually constantly there, apart from politics and public policy, is football. It was about two local teams that did not agree on the outcome.
Okay,
and the person called Ruto that was being asked to go out is the local FKF leader there. It's out there. If you dig deeper, you will find that. My final report on, my final words on dialogue is this, that dear Kenyans, I said that all that was needed will be done in Parliament, it will be done in county assemblies, it will be done in the cabinet.
Okay.
It was not supposed to be done in the streets. We have lost people, and in this report, you do not see anything that covers the mothers who lost their sons.
Okay.
It's important to actually underscore that in the whole report, they don't talk about the graves, 60 graves countrywide, of women and fathers who lost their children to these demonstrations. These things should have been done in Parliament. Like I said, the three of us could have done that thing just doing your tea here.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm so sorry, Ano, but muda imeni kwepa kidogo. Maliba Arnold, who is a public policy analyst. We also have Advocate of the High Court, Annabelle Njoki, and Mark Bichache, communication strategist. Thank you very much. I know this is a lot. I will plead with you to come back another day and to interrogate, because
unless you add time.
Campaign financing, no, ilikuwa tu hiyo paragraph moja yenye ulikuwa unasema in the recommendations, and then we'll look further into this, the Article 43 of the Constitution, the cost of living and related issues. My name is Olive Barrios. Coming up is your world, at least that is later subject matters. We are discussing traveling during the holidays, assuming you have the mafuta to burn. See you at the other side of this break.